Hi, my name is Sara Bernal. Today I'm going to be discussing the reflective essay, and I decided to do my reflective essay on the topic of Lev Vygotsky's social cultural perspective and the zone of proximal development, ZPD. So, first of all, I'm going to go ahead and start with the ZPD. Here's a diagram I made, and this deals with learning through guidance, learning independently, and not knowing anything at this point. So this is where learners start. They don't know how to do something. They don't know the method of doing anything. And with guidance, they get to the ZPD, the zone of proximal development, and this is where they get to when they work independently. So it's important that we guide as teachers, that we understand that we're not the only ones that are able to guide a student. Staff members, other kids that are actually a little bit higher in the knowledge and maybe older, parents, everybody becomes a guide. So it's important that we give our students the opportunity to interact, because social interaction is very important. Kids are like sponges. Even if we're making a phone call, they're able to see what we do, how we pick up the phone, whether we decide to pick it up or not. So there's all of these steps that we have to make in order to pick up a simple phone call. And even kids are able to understand this, and they're able to make phone calls in the future. They're able to do a lot of different tasks, cooking, just life skills in general. So it's important that parents and teachers and other kids are able to understand that we all learn from each other. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is the social cultural perspective. When I first started working as a special education teacher, I had to focus on different populations in my class. I focused specifically on autistic children because I had a lot of autistic children in my class. So I came from a homeschool setting, a setting where I worked with extremely privileged kids that were very smart, and we got to do a lot of great things because we had the resources to do those things. So I came from 10 years of working in that field and doing some volunteering and all that, to working with special needs children, which was beyond me. I mean, I passed my exam. I was able to start working with special needs kids, but I didn't have a solid foundation, and I definitely didn't have the experience. So I was at a loss. I was shocked. I was having a hard time. I also came in mid-year, so that also had a lot to do with it. So the very first thing that I'd like to talk about is how ZPD, zone of proximal development, is changed when there is no social interaction. For example, I had read a few studies for when I was writing this paper that dealt with Romanian orphanages. So in Romania in the 1980s, as you guys know, there was the Soviet Union. They were pretty much all over Russia, and they had a very strict regime. And these kids were left at orphanages because their parents died, because their parents fled. They just pretty much abandoned them. There was a lot of hunger. So these kids were left at these government institutions where there was maybe like 5 or 6 nuns or nurses there. And they were pretty much left in their cribs, looking up at a blank white ceiling. And they weren't nurtured, they weren't loved, and they were definitely not interacted with. So they had a lot of stunted growth, they had a lot of mental issues, a lot of psychological and emotional issues. And then there was a case of this one kid that had polio. When he got dropped off or whatever, he had polio, and a nurse really took care of him. That nurse for 5 years was pretty much his mother. So he was brought up differently. So he ended up being a very well-rounded individual as an adult, even though he had the problems with the polio, compared to the other kids that were perfectly healthy at the orphanage, because he had that nurture, he had that interaction, and that made a world of a difference. So it's very, very interesting, and it kind of supports what Lev Vygotsky says, that interaction is everything. And that in order to reach the zone of proximal development and get into the independent learning, it's important to have that guide, and it's important to have that interaction. So when I worked with some children, when I was going through my first 2 years of college, I had to take up a lot of volunteering. It looks good on your resume, you know how it is, and it's also really good because you get a lot of experience. So I ended up taking care of these 2 twin boys. They were 9. Their mom would drop them off. I did that for about 3 weeks, And as summer was approaching, the program that I worked for had like free, I guess like free services, and I asked the lady if she wanted to drop off her twins, and she told me no, that one of them lived with the father and one of them lived with her. They had split up at the very beginning, and in order to not go through courts and all that, they had taken each twin, and they would see each other once in a while, but not, they didn't live together. I noticed that the twin that lived with the father worked in the oil fields. He was never around. He pretty much neglected. He had girlfriends like all the time, so he never had that mother, like female or even that male role model in his life that taught him things, that interacted with him, that nurtured him, that loved him. So he had a lot of problems with self-regulation. He had problems with communication. He would cry a lot when he get dropped off or picked up. While the other twin, the one that lived with the mother, was like, he would do his work, he would listen, he was just very socially interested. He was good. And I always wondered why these twins were so different. I mean, genetically they were the same, but their issues came from nurturing instead of, instead of from their genes. Like they were so different because of their interaction with the world and how much they were loved and nurtured. And this brings to a point that neglect and abuse does ruin things for children, and the ZPD and Lev Vygotsky's social interaction theories, those are all important because we need to understand as adults that kids need to interact, and that we need to interact positively with our kids in the classroom and at home. So then I started working obviously with autistic children in the classroom. I really didn't have a lot of experience. I started working and I was at a loss. I had no experience, so I would just take it one day at a time. I would notice that the kids, when they'd go to inclusion, they really didn't interact with other kids, and I thought, okay, why are these kids being I guess shy, or why are these kids not interacting? But I soon found out that they just don't have some of the skills that are needed to interact with other kids, and these regular ed kids would have been perfect guides to teaching the autistic children to get to the different levels and to learn different things, but there was no connection there. So when they would come back to the classroom, I would make sure that I would make connections between them, that I would give them opportunities to interact and to learn from each other. So I noticed that interaction is very, very important, and if you don't have it, even of inclusion, the whole point of inclusion is for kids to be in the least restrictive environment and to be able to mingle and interact with each other. But when the autistic child doesn't have the capabilities of interacting with a regular ed student, even while in recess, even while in lunchtime, even while they're at PE, it's super important that we give these opportunities. And that's why I think inclusion does work. It just has to be tweaked when it comes to autistic children. And this is the perfect way to get the ZPD in. So lastly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the ZPD and standardized testing. I know that it really doesn't have much to do with what I just talked about, but if Lev Vygotsky were alive right now, he would be turning, like he would be like, what's going on? We are very, very much focused on standardized testing, and we know that that's how we are accountable for our students, and there's nothing really wrong with it, but at the same time, we have no group setting, we have no natural competition. It's pretty much testing and testing and testing, and it's not really, it doesn't have anything to do with the ZPD. It doesn't have anything with interaction. We don't really gain much from it other than a number. Did you pass it? Did you fail? So even though I'm a decent test taker, I think I am, I understand why people don't test well. And one of the reasons they might not test well is because they don't have opportunities for guidance. They don't have opportunities for social interaction. And this whole standardized testing isn't really, like, it's kind of at odds with CPD, and it's kind of at odds with the social cultural perspective. So I know that Lev Vygotsky would not be happy about it. So how can we help our students in the classroom? Well, first of all, we can set up challenges. We can set up challenging tasks and enable the kids to do it. We can start guiding them and getting to a point where they're able to do things on their own, but using the CPD. I know that when kids are in the special education setting in the classroom, we have to look at their IEPs and make sure to follow protocols. Make sure that we get them to reach their goals with our help and without our help. That's important. Remember that scaffolding is important in construction. It's important in teaching every child. We need to guide them for as long as we have to, until we get them to work independently, until we get them to reach the middle of the bullseye. And then we have, of course, to think about play. And I know that a lot of the times as teachers, we want a peaceful classroom, we want a smooth running classroom, but we also have to think how kids interact and they think and they play, and they use dialogue, they use conflict, and they resolve it through play. So it's important that we give our kids that opportunity to learn from each other and to gain guides. There's always, a few children in the class that are natural leaders. Even in a special education class, there's natural leaders and they want to teach others. And a lot of the times kids learn from teaching others and by guiding others. So as teachers, we need to think there's a way that we can get the kids to interact and learn, play. Thank you for listening and take care.